Well, talking about sales, the very first question that should come to your mind when when we talk about sales is gonna be how do I sell somebody something that I really want to sell. But before we get to that point, should we give it a little thought whether sales is an art or a science? Now, typically, when we speak of art, art could be anything abstract. It could be a kind of painting, it could be music, or any kind of a piece of art. Now, if it is music or a painting, depending on people's perspective, depending on individual to individual, everybody would have a different point of view. Somebody would say this particular piece of music sounds like somebody is in pain, or maybe somebody is glorifying in joy. I don't know. Maybe every different music would have its own explanation for different people. Similarly, if you look at a painting would also have different explanations. Different individuals would go ahead and make a different interpretation out of that altogether. Now, that's what is an art, okay? Now, if we are talking about science, science is technically, gonna give you the same answer every time you try and, make an experiment or something like that. Now, for instance, if I take two different chemicals, A and B, every time I mix these two chemicals, I'm going to get the same result out of it. Whether it is, sodium and chlorine making sodium chloride, or it could be any kind of chemical combination that we are looking at. Or if you even consider mathematics for that reason, mathematics is also a very simple understanding. 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4. It can never go to 6 or 5 or any other number for that reason. So similarly, arts and science have their own understanding, and art can is something that is diverged. It is, it has n number of explanations. But when it comes to science, it has one single explanation for one phenomena or property of any particular thing. But when we are talking about sales, it is either it is art or it is science is the next question that comes to our mind. But the funniest part is it is neither an art nor a science. So what could it be possibly? Let's look at it. Well, quite precisely, sales is simply a practice. It is simply a practice, it is a craft. Now, when we are talking about sales and why it is a practice, why is it a craft, is the next question that I must be asking myself. Simple enough. Practice makes man perfect. That is a very well known proverb that we have heard all together. But why is it that I'm associating sales to a practice or a craft for that reason? If you try and make a boat out of A4 sheet paper, for example, you might make it all right, okie dokie kind of a output in the first time, or a plane, for example, or a rocket, what kids even try and make in their school days. I used to do that when I was a kid. But nevertheless, every time I tried making this kind of a aeroplane or a boat out of a paper or any kind of a picture that I had in my mind, like if I could try and make it into a 3D, I found myself to be making something better every time I made that. Now, this is why it is directly associated with practice and craft. Practice also is something of the same order. Sales also is of the same something of the same order. How it is because every time I try and sell something to XYZ person, I improve my sales skill. I understand better how should I put it across every time I do it to somebody. Every time I try and sell something to some XYZ person, the second attempt is going to be better, the third attempt is going to be better, and so on and so forth. I'm going to go on improvising on my own self, on my own pitch, on how I sell it to somebody. So this is how we understand that sales is technically a practice, a craft. It is not an art or a science. If we were to call it art, it would be, you go ahead and tell anything to anybody, and people must buy it, whether they understand or not. That is irrespective of that. But that doesn't go that way. But sales precisely does not go that way. The person clearly needs to understand what it is. And on the other hand, if I would call it a science, it would be something like, I would go ahead and make a constant pitch. I would go ahead and make a monotonous, argument, or a complete recording, or some kind of a, a pitch, what do you say, a script or something like that. And I would expect my customers to be buying it irrespective of what their viewpoint is, because 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4. Sodium plus chloride is always going to be sodium chloride, which is our common salt that we use. But that doesn't work that way. Every time I go and meet a different person, I have to change my pitch. I have to change my thought process altogether to go ahead and match his thought process so that he understands what I am trying to convey to him and understands how exactly the product is going to be useful for this person. Now that's exactly why it is not an art, it is not a science, and it is simply a pure practice, or a craft, you can say. Every time I try and do this, I'm going to improvise on myself. Moving further, sales complements every other business effort. Why do we say that? It's simply because, sales is something that drives any business for that reason. If I do not have sales in my business, for instance, I'm not going to be able to process my business any further. Maybe I can pool funds from XYZ areas, and try and run my business as long as I can. But until unless somebody is buying my product, until and unless somebody is purchasing it willfully, and I see a market for it, I do not see my business proceeding. So with understanding that, keeping that in our mind, we have to understand that sales is something that complements every other business effort. Now for example, if I take a bank account, if I'm opening a bank account for somebody as a salesperson, I see that this particular form is going to go to a logging department, which would go ahead and process all the details of my customer. It would go ahead and generate an account number, and issue checkbooks, open an account, provide online accounting systems, online access for the account, and X, Y, Z, all the other services that come up with the account as such. But technically, all these services that the bank is offering would be of no use if I do not have an account to give it to. Are you getting the point now? All the things that I have in my business are technically directly related to drive sales and to serve the customer. That's all the objective of any businesses. That's the reason we put it across in such a way that sales complements every other business effort. Finally, and we are looking at the utility of sales. Now for example, I'm a good salesman, I'm a master salesman maybe in my office, but how does it help me, or does it help me, is the next point, in my own life in future, probably if I don't want to be a salesman tomorrow? My answer to this question is yes, certainly it is going to help you throughout your life. How? Quite simply, if we take an example of a child, a young little boy trying to convince his father. When I say convince, please note that word and underline it. When I say convince, it's going to be convincing his father to go ahead and purchase, say, a bicycle or maybe a candy. It doesn't matter. So ultimately, the kid is trying to, sell the idea of buying a cycle, a bicycle, or a candy for him. Whether the father or the mother buys the idea or not is secondary. But if and when he is doing a good enough emotional job on his sales pitch, of course the kids are really good at that, bear me on that, but of course the kid himself is trying to sell, and the father is buying at that point of time, or the mother for that instance. On the other hand, if you're looking at a situation where a husband and wife is interacting, maybe a wife is trying to demand a husband for a vacation or something like that. In that particular case, I would say that the wife is selling the idea of a vacation or a holiday to her husband. Similarly, when we move further, kids interacting with parents, parents interacting with kids, wives, and all the relationships that we are looking at, which we technically call to be very personal and things like that, all at the end of the day is selling. So the better you get at this, the better you get at your personal relationships as well. What is an interview, on the other hand? An interview also is something that you sell yourself. If you are really good at sales, then you would, even if you would change your profession, say if I am temporarily doing sales, bad luck if I don't find any other job, that's the reason I'm doing sales. Technically, it is also proven that most people join sales because there is no other option that they find. Nevertheless, whatever your reasons could be that you are in sales, if tomorrow you want to go into a different job profile altogether, this particular learnings that you have from sales is going to be useful for you all your life. That's how sales is a lifelong utility.